Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name's Mel Chadwick. I'm an illustrator and love keeping sketchbooks. In this video I'm going to be sharing some sketches from my sketchbooks. I've been taking a break from work and every day we've been going out to walk a different area that is still close to us, but we've just been treating it as a holiday time. So each day we've been packing a picnic, packing our bags with water. I've been packing my bag with my sketchbooks, my art supplies, as well as taking along my camera. But each day we've been walking a different part of Cornwall, whether it's on the Lizard Peninsula or over towards Falmouth or over towards Mousehole and Penzance. We've been just treating it as our holiday, and I thought you'd really like to see the sketches that I have created during this time. Every day I did draw, and the time I spent drawing was ranging from 15 minutes to 20 minutes to an hour, depending on where we were and what we were doing. I'll be able to show you a couple of pages from my small Moleskine and then my large Moleskine, and then I started a new sketchbook which I was excited to try out, and I'll be excited to show you as well how it's working for me. Before I get into the sketchbooks, I'll just quickly share what materials I took out with me. If you are really interested in a more in-depth look at what I take out to sketch with, I have got a video and I'll link that below in the description, as well as putting a card up. So each time we went out, I packed my bag with my sendak roll and these tins, and then also took my Derwent paint palette, which is looking a little bit worse for wear now, and you can see which colours that I love to use the most. The greens and this blue, which is kind of like a Payne's grey blue. And you can see it's looking a little bit dirty now, but it's been used very much over the last 10 days. I've also got two of these water barreled brushes. They've both got water in, and it was just handy to actually have two because when one ran out I could just quickly go on to the next one and then refill them at the end of the session for the next time. In these tins I have all my Neocolor 2s, and I kind of have colour grouped them so that it's easy for me to know where the colour is. So all my blues and greys are in that tin. I then have my red tin, which actually doesn't have any reds, but it has that kind of range. So it's got browns, apricots, pinks, like yellows, warm tones. So again, it's just helpful to know where my colours are. And then the green tin has got the greens, it has got a turquoise in there, and again a range of greens. And then finally in my sendak roll I have all of my coloured pencils that I use. I use luminance, I use Inktense pencils, and then also I have my black fine liners along with a sailor pen, as well as a Lamy Joy fountain pen. And then you can just see tucked behind there are some Ecoline brush pen inks, and yeah, that is kind of my basic kit that I take out with me. I also take out in this bit of some pencils that are too small, as well as pencil sharpener and a rubber, although to be honest the rubber eraser is rarely used. So this is actually, now that I finished it, is due for a tour, but I'll do that in another video. So this is a Moleskine sketchbook. It's quite a handy size, as you can see it fits nicely in the palm of my hands. This one actually is probably my preferred sketchbook, this kind of size for going out and quickly just taking it out. You can hold it and draw in it without having to balance it on something. So it's not heavy, and it's pretty ideal for travel sketching, when you're on the move, that kind of thing. So it's definitely a good thing to consider when you are going out sketching on the move. This is the first sketch from our holiday period. This was drawn at a cafe where we had our anniversary meal, the 3rd of August. And this is at Fat Apple's Cafe, a favourite of ours, and we went there just for a nice meal out, and basically it was a lovely start to our 10 days or so of just taking some time off. This sketch is very quickly done. It was a mix of watercolour, the luminance pencils and Inktense pencils. It's quite soft and pastel-y in areas. For me, it probably needed a bit more contrast, but just getting down the cafe as we were waiting for our order, that's when I was sketching this. So the next sketch was in my A4 Moleskine, and a lot bigger book to carry around. But what I do like about the larger size is that you've got more space to play with, so you can play with layouts and you can think about how you're going to capture what it is that you're drawing. So this day was on the 4th of August, and we actually took a ferry. We went to Falmouth to catch the ferry over to St Mawes. We had actually never done that, even though we've been in Falmouth. We had lived in Falmouth for about 7 years. We hadn't actually catched the ferry over to St Mawes. So that was a really nice thing to do, and it kind of makes you feel like you're actually on holiday, you know, when you're taking different transport or you're doing something different. So we went over to St Mawes, which is a little kind of touristy kind of village. And then from St Mawes we took another little boat, this time a much smaller boat, and went over to a place called Place. And this is where these sketches were done. So the first thing that we saw was this lovely yellow house called Place House, and I just spent, I think it was about 15 minutes on this one. Just drew the building, started with the watercolours, and then added pencil and neocolour afterwards. These sketches were all done with my husband being present, which is kind of unusual because most of my sketching is done on my own, or in recent weeks I've been, you know, sketching with some friends who are also sketching, but my husband doesn't normally sit with me as I'm sketching, so it was kind of awkward at the beginning because I was thinking, oh, he's going to be bored, or he's going to be thinking, what are you doing, or come on, let's move on. But actually he said to me, you know, he's quite happy for me to sketch, and so we'd kind of agreed that that's what I would be doing. So I think if you are going to sketch with a non-sketcher, maybe just talk about what the expectation is on both of your sides. So he expected me to sketch, you know, not all the time, but sketch maybe 15-20 minutes here and there, and he was quite happy to actually sit and just look at the view and just enjoy, yeah, a rest period. So the next sketch that I did was a bit further along. We had walked for probably 20 minutes and we were going to have our lunch. So it was again a nice time just to sit. We were sitting in a field with lots of cows. They were kind of not too curious cows, so they were kind of standing back and they didn't come over. But there was a lovely view then looking over to St Anthony and the headland that we were going to be walking around. So I sketched that just after I ate something, and so just to let our food go down I was just sketching. So that then was another about 10-15 minute sketch. Anthony. And then we go over to this sketch here. Now, between this time and this time, it was definitely a lot longer period. We had actually walked around the headland, we had walked across a few fields, gone across a path. Maybe someone's even drawn a little 4 peregrines, all and one caught something. That was 2 days ago. We'd actually tried to catch the little boat that would take us back to Mawes, but it was too busy to get on. So just thought, let's just go round and take another view in of St Mawes. So that's what we did, and it was boiling hot. The last actually 10 days have been very hot every day. So we just went round and I decided to sketch the view across to St Mawes. And that's when I created this one, and you can see I've actually written here 20 minutes. This one actually, I remember sketching it and thinking, this is quite complicated. As you can see, there are lots and lots of houses, and sometimes when you're trying to do something quickly, you can get a little bit overwhelmed if your subjects, there's so many things to capture. So I intentionally just try to keep my colour palette really simple, and I again worked in layers, started with watercolour, then started adding colour pencil, and then my final layer was actually the outlining of the houses, and then keeping it really simple just with the windows and doors. It was only when I started putting the windows and doors in that it started to all come together. We then walked from this view then back to the quay where we waited for the ferry, and I only had 10 minutes to do this sketch, so you can see it's a lot quicker, a lot looser. I had also kept my colours very simple as well. So I really like how these all work together, and you can see you can either do a little frame, you can leave things quite loose, zoom in. So I quite like the different things that are going on here. I've got buildings, I've got landscape, I've got a bit of the sea as well. So we caught the boat back over to St Mawes. It was still quite warm and we had to wait for the ferry, so we didn't want to wait in the harbour area because it was really loud, there was lots of people, so we just went up to the hill. Thought it would be really nice to try and capture the castle, St Mawes Castle, and then you can see in the distance is St Anthony's Head, and then there was this little tiny hut which I didn't get in this one because it was here, so I decided to capture the little hut there. There are also lots of swallows, and they were also just darting around all around the castle, so I tried to capture their shape. So that was our trip to St Mawes and Place on the 4th of August. We decided to walk from Coverack round to Downers Cove, and on our way there we went through a sculpture park that was there. We had actually been there, I think, briefly quite a few years ago, but hadn't really stayed there a long time. So we actually walked around the sculpture park. It was funny because Tony sat down and spent some time looking at all the sculptures, and whilst he was doing that I kind of looked at the view, which was kind of through these trees, and there was this view to this beach and this cove here. That's what I thought, it would be great to try and sketch that. Again, quite a loose sketch, quite a quick sketch. At the time I wasn't sure how well I was capturing it because again it was very, very hot, it was very sunny. Sometimes when it's so bright and sunny you can't really see what's going on the page, but actually looking at it now I like how I've got the lighter areas and then some greener areas and darker areas. We then walked further along the coastal path, going up and around Blackhead, looking at the Coast Watch place where you could see and read more information about the area and the wildlife. And then a bit further on we had to take a little break because it was pretty strenuous walking the coastal path in such heat, so we kind of found a little bit of a rock to shelter by. I took out my sketchbook and sketched this view, which was looking down towards Downers Cove. I think what I like about this sketch is that it feels quite loose and fresh, and just doing a few strokes with the watercolour really brings the sketch to life, and then adding a few details. I think also having the high contrast also shows what the weather was like, that it was quite bright sunshine, and I really like this little line here which kind of indicates that there was a path going down. And that's the end of that sketchbook. So time for this sketchbook, which is again A4 in size, but this time it's landscape rather than portrait, which means when you open it up it is an almost panoramic view. So this sketchbook is quite different. I've never used this kind of sketchbook before. Just open that up. This sketchbook is from Delusions by Dylan Reveley, I think. It's a creative flip journal. I actually saw this on Sandy Hester's channel. I think one of her viewers had gifted her this sketchbook, and it just looks like a really interesting sketchbook to try out. I really love trying out new sketchbooks, so I thought to give it a try. So it's got this little envelope here that you can put stuff in. It's kind of got a cardboard outer cover. It is quite heavy. That would be my only negative, maybe, if you are carrying this around with you. It's quite heavy to carry it around with you. So you can see it's kind of set into that. with the red linen binding there. We decided to go over to Botallack, which is on the west of Cornwall, a tin mining country. So the landscape is really quite different to the Lizard. I mean, it's still rugged in that sense, but there was a mining industry there, so you've still got lots of remnants of tin mine towers, normally piles of rock. You can see how the landscape has been used, you know, in that way. You also have to be quite careful because there's a lot of mine shafts as well. Anyway, this was when we had walked from Botallack right down to Cape Cornwall. Walked around here and we were kind of looking for somewhere to have our lunch and our picnic, and it was again a really hot day. There was not a lot of shelter around this area, so we kind of retraced our steps back and then found this little nook in the wall, and you can sit on this little wall, and we thought this is a perfect spot just to eat and take shelter from the sun, and so that's where I drew this sketch. So again, it was a very bright day, and you can see, I think, in my colour choices, the colours aren't as saturated. I've also written here as well, hot, dry, windy day, spotted large bird of prey hovering, buzzards. So that's why there is a few birds in the air, because there were quite a few birds of prey just kind of looking for food. So on the same day we then walked back from the Cape Cornwall and came across this valley called Kennejack Cove. You had to actually leave the coastal path and then come down into it, and as you came down into it you saw lots, again, remnants of the mining industry. So there were like unusual buildings which had been left, and like holes in walls and boulders all over the place, and then there was like a stream running through which may have been used in the process of mining. And then right at the bottom there you came out to the sea. You had this landscape kind of going away from you, and it was this point that I thought it would be great to sketch. And I do remember sitting down on a big rock, and it was very, very hot. We took our shoes off because they were kind of burning in the heat, and just kind of sat there and relaxed. Well, sat there and tried to rest. What I really like about this picture is it feels a lot more painterly. It feels like just a lot looser, and I used a lot more paint, more than my pencils, and then I just used for definition the neo colour just to give some contrast. But it felt a lot quicker doing this. I was a lot quicker doing it, other than the putting detail on the cottages above. Most of this was just done with my paintbrush. So the third sketch on this day, there were quite a few sketches done on this day. This was going back to Botallack, and so we were heading back to where we had parked the car, so it was kind of near the end of the time that this is where you could see the abandoned tin mines and shafts, and you can see there's a lot more industrial remnants in the landscape. Also the colours were so many colours, and it was actually a little bit overwhelming because I wanted to capture it all, but because I didn't have time, I was trying to do it quickly. I think I just couldn't quite get a handle on this one and on this sketch. So for me this feels quite overworked, and you can see that it feels a lot tighter than the sketch before, which was quite loose. And then we have a final one for this day. This was after we'd gone back to the car and then we'd just taken a loo stop. We just thought we'd walk a bit further the other way, and it was definitely more industrial going that way. And so instead of using all my colours, I just decided to use the art graph block. They come in blocks like this and they're water soluble, and you can basically just pop your paintbrush on it with water and then use it, or you can also draw with it. So I used a sepia colour, and I think I just wetted my brush and did some quick gestural marks. I then went in on the side of it and just started drawing on top. I just think it captures the an industrial aspect of it, and also how everything was looking very, very, you know, like when things have been in the sun a long time and things look quite scorched. That's kind of what it was like to draw, and I think that lent itself to that environment. On the 7th of August, I went to a vintage rally. And this time I went on my own. Tony was having a break, and I decided to just take my chair and go and draw some of the cars that were there. So for this sketch I just used my Lamy fountain pen, and I did use the pencils on top of that, but all of the background is added after, when I was back home. So rather than trying to do it all, I just captured the cars and then used the watercolour as well on these cars. And this spread did the line work and left all of the colour till afterwards. Again, it was a very hot day, no shelter to escape to. I just thought I'd just draw some of the cars that I was interested in, and managed to capture these two who were dressed in like an old vintage uniform. And I just took film footage and then took some photographs and then just worked on that afterwards. So on the 8th of August we went this time over to Penzance, and we stopped at Penzance and had a picnic there, and then we decided to walk from Penzance to Mawes, which is about 3 miles. It was a very, very hot day again, and also the path that we walked on was like really hard poured concrete, so it was like really light, and it was almost acting like a reflector, so you almost felt like you were kind of being fried as you were walking. So by the time we got to this point there was a bench. We had planned to maybe go actually over to Mawes, but at this point it was just, we were both exhausted and just needed to sit down. Again, used my Lamy fountain pen and I just did a really quick pen sketch. I did add a bit of watercolour to it, but a lot of the, like all the sky and the pencil I've added later, along with bits down here. So I just captured it very quickly and then added to it later. We did manage to make it back to the car park, and then we decided to walk the other way to Mousehole, and these are the two little panels that I drew, and I thought it would be nice to try and break the page up. So we sat on another little bench and just watched the boats coming in and out. And again, this was done with my Lamy pen to begin with. I added a little bit of the colour whilst we were there, and then I took some photos, and then I've added more of it again once we had got home. This time we were on the Lizard and we went to the Halford, and then we walked through some of the woods and found a tiny little chapel. This is the Chapel of St Francis, so it was kind of hidden in amongst the trees. And then we walked round through Frenchman's Creek, and at the end of the creek we discovered this lovely little quay. So there was no one else there, and it was just a really nice rest point. It just opened up to this view, and just sat underneath the tree. Tony used his binoculars to kind of just look around, and there were lots of little fish, a lot of little fish kind of popping up out of the water. And it was just a really nice restful time. So we walked up to Godolphin Hill, and whilst I was at the top of the hill I did this little sketch here. Again, very hot day and not a lot of shade, so this was done very quickly with a few of the houses and then the mine. Walked down towards Great Work Mine, and I decided to sketch a close-up of that here. And whilst we were sitting here, Tony picked some blackberries which were ready and ripe to eat. These are actually added at home back in my studio rather than actually when we were eating them. So it's just kind of things like that which you can just add to. You don't have to add everything all at once. I did actually draw a tree whilst we were waiting just for the cars. There were a lot of cars kind of going, so I just drew a tree. This whole map I did then actually in the studio, because I really thought it would be a nice thing to add to make this spread more interesting. So I kind of traced the route that we took up to the hill, and then that was the viewpoint where I drew this picture, and then we walked down and around past the cows. That's the little forest where I drew this, and yeah, back to here. So it was quite nice to include, and then I've included some of the flowers or foliage that we saw there. So the heather, the oak, beech, ash, and a little colour palette. So the next day, the 11th, we walked around the Halford again. This time we went the opposite direction. This was a cove that we found about 3/4 into the journey. Again, it was a very hot day and it was quite tiring walking this route. So we happened upon this cove and just was able to sketch it. We spent probably about an hour sitting in the cove because it was very hot and we just needed to rest. We just walked through some fields with brambles and there was no shade at all, so this was a very welcome rest. And yeah, I really actually enjoyed doing this one, and you can see there's a mix of brushwork, a mix of watercolours, and then my neocolours and line work on top. I think my favourite bit was actually adding lots of little boats. These were all added near the end, and just on top, just to give perspective. This was the final spread that I did, final time out. We were hoping to go over to a garden, a National Trust garden, but it wasn't open. So instead we actually ended up eating our picnic in this field, that I think it was a field of barley, but it had a great view over to St Michael's Mount, and there was this kind of large, what looked like a designer building here, so that was quite interesting. And yeah, I just sketched this view. We then drove to Mousehole again, but this time we walked from Mousehole round to Lamorna Cove, which we hadn't done before. And so this was Lamorna Cove. This, though, I would say is definitely a sketch that turned into a bit of an epic drawing. You'll see in the footage that it looks a little bit different, because when I got home I just wanted to work on it more, and so that's why there's a lot more detail in this than was in the original kind of sketch. To be honest, I think I might have overworked this. There's too much really in it now, but I was just getting quite carried away, I think, with all of the colours again and the details, and I'd love to actually go back to this place and sketch it again, just seeing if I can simplify it a bit more and just capture the essence of it. And Lamorna actually had quite a big active group of artists who loved painting the landscape around there, and one of the artists was called Samuel John Birch, and he actually, though, because he loved it so much, that he actually gave himself the name Lamorna Birch. And I just love his artwork. He really captures the landscape and the colours, and I think he's one of these artists that I'll always be inspired by his work. So these boulders that I've drawn here are actually inspired by his work and how he captures the landscape. He uses a lot of different colours, but they all kind of fit together, so you should definitely check out his work if you're looking for landscape artists. He died in 1955, but lived in the Lamorna area and used to paint outside, and you can see that in his work. There seems a freshness in his work. And then these two little sketches were done as well afterwards, based from a photo that I took. This was Swingate F, called Swingate F. It's a standing stone or a menhir, and that was in one of the fields. And then this was the view from when we were walking round to Kemyel Crease Nature Reserve. There was these pine trees right by the sea, and it's quite incredible to see, because that's not normal. You wouldn't normally see pine trees right by the sea, and especially in Cornwall, because in Cornwall you normally have tiny little trees, stunted trees that have been blown by the wind, so it's quite unusual to see these massive pine trees. So those are all my sketches from my time out, and it's actually really nice to have this as a record now, that I can look back and remember where we went, remember what we did, remember the views that we saw. Thank you so much for watching. Do let me know in the comments which spreads were your favourite, and also if you enjoy sketching on holiday too. Alright, thank you so much guys, and I'll speak to you again really soon. The tails are just so cute, aren't they?